The Siren of Oblivion. The town of Miller's Cross looked like a place where time had stopped somewhere in the middle of the last century. Wooden houses with sagging porches, one main street, Margaret Chen's store with a sign that creaked in the wind. 80 residents. No hospital. No crowds. No questions. That was exactly what Ethan Rios needed. He arrived in February, when snow lay in such thick layers that the streets seemed like tunnels between white walls. His rental house stood on the edge of town, small, cold, with cracked windows and creaking floors. Perfect. Ethan unpacked mechanically, clothes, books, laptop, a bottle of sleeping pills. His hands trembled, as they had for months now. He clenched his fists, trying to stop the shaking, but it only intensified. A memory flashed through his mind, the operating room, bright lights, the monotonous beeping of a machine that turned into a continuous flatline. He quickly opened the bottle and swallowed a pill without water. Outside, dusk was falling. From the window, he could see the main street, empty, snow-covered, with yellow patches from streetlights. A few houses glowed with warm light. Others stood dark, as if abandoned. Ethan didn't plan to meet the neighbors. Didn't plan to stay long. He just wanted to disappear for a while, dissolve, become nobody in a place where no one knew his name. The first night in Miller's Cross was quiet. Too quiet. Ethan lay in bed, listening to the wind howling through cracks in the window frame. Snow fell silently, a thick blanket absorbing all sounds of the world. And then, at 3:33 in the morning, the siren sounded. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. Long, wailing, insistent. An ambulance siren, so close it seemed the vehicle was driving right under his windows. Ethan sat up sharply in bed, heart pounding. Instinctively reached for his phone, maybe someone needs help, maybe they need him as a doctor. But the siren didn't approach or recede. It just sounded, monotonous, mechanical, filling the entire room. Ethan walked to the window and looked outside. The main street was empty. No vehicle. No tracks in the fresh snow. No red flashing lights. Just a white desert under the dim glow of streetlights and a siren that came from nowhere and everywhere. The sound lasted about 2 minutes, then abruptly stopped. The silence returned, even more oppressive than before. Ethan stood by the window, staring at the empty street, trying to convince himself it was a dream, a hallucination, a side effect of the sleeping pills. But his hands were trembling again. In the morning, he went to Margaret's store. The small shop smelled of coffee, fresh bread, and something sweet, cinnamon, perhaps. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled into a bun and attentive brown eyes. "You're new," she said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. Ethan Rios. Rented the Miller house. Margaret Chen. "If you need anything, I'm here." She handed him coffee. "Was your first night okay?" Ethan hesitated. Heard a siren. Around 3 in the morning. "Ambulance, I think." Margaret froze for a moment, then smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Ah, that. Sometimes sound carries from the highway. Wind plays tricks here in winter." "The highway's 12 miles away," Ethan said. "Exactly. The wind." She turned away, began wiping something on the counter. Ethan didn't press. He took his coffee and went outside. The snow had stopped, and the morning sun made the town almost picturesque. A few people walked the street, nodding at him. An old man with a gray beard sat on the porch of a house across from the store, smoking a pipe. "Good morning," Ethan said. The man nodded. "Leonard West. Lived here all my life." "Ethan Rios. Just arrived." "I know." Leonard smiled. "Everyone knows everything here." He drew on his pipe. "Heard the siren last night?" Ethan tensed. "I did. Did you too?" "I always hear it." Leonard stared somewhere into the woods beyond town. "For many years now. It comes for someone." "For whom?" The old man didn't answer. Just sat and smoked, staring into emptiness. The next night, Ethan didn't sleep, waiting. At 3:33, the siren sounded again, longer, louder, as if circling his house. He ran outside barefoot, wearing just a t-shirt, but again nothing. Empty road. Perfect snow without tracks. And in the morning, when he came to the store, no one was on the porch. Leonard's house stood dark, closed, as if abandoned for years. "Where's Leonard West?" Ethan asked Margaret. She looked up at him with surprise. "Who?" "Leonard West. Old man, lived in the house across the street. I talked to him yesterday." Margaret shook her head. "Ethan, nobody's lived in that house. It's been empty for 10 years, since old Mrs. Clarkson died." "No," Ethan felt cold crawling up his spine. "I saw him. Talked to him. He was smoking a pipe, said he'd lived here all his life." "Maybe you dreamed it." Margaret spoke softly, but something like worry or pity appeared in her eyes. First nights in a new place can be difficult. Especially after, she fell silent. "After what?" "After whatever you're running from." She handed him coffee. "People don't come to Miller's Cross just because. We're all running from something here." Ethan left the store and walked to Leonard's house. The porch was old, wood blackened with time. He tried to look through the window. Inside was only dust, empty rooms, furniture under white sheets. No signs of life. No trace of a smoking pipe. But he remembered. Remembered the old man's face, his voice, the smell of tobacco. Ethan started writing. In a notebook, old-fashioned, paper, because computers can't be trusted, they can be hacked, erased. He wrote, Leonard West. Old man with gray beard. Smoked pipe. Lived in house across from store. Disappeared after second night of siren. Nobody remembers. The third night, the siren repeated. This time Ethan didn't go outside. He sat in darkness, notebook in his hands, listened and recorded. 3:33. Duration, 3 minutes 12 seconds. Sound surrounds house. No visual confirmation. And in the morning, Allison Gray disappeared, a young woman who worked at the library. Ethan knew this because he'd seen her the day before when he went there looking for books about the town's history. She'd smiled at him, offered help. But when he came to the library again, a different woman sat at the desk, older, with glasses on a chain. "Where's Allison?" Ethan asked. "I'm the only librarian here," the woman replied. "Always have been." "Catherine Miller." "No, yesterday there was a young woman here, dark hair, green eyes." Catherine looked at him with concern. "Young man, are you all right? Maybe you need help." Ethan left without answering. On the street, he met a police officer, young, Latino features, with a badge on his chest. "David Torres," he introduced himself. "Only cop in town. Heard you're new. Everything okay?" No, Ethan pulled out his notebook. People are disappearing. Leonard West, Allison Gray. And everyone pretends they never existed. David took the notebook, looked through the entries. His face remained calm, but something changed in his eyes. Ethan, I'll check these names. But there's no Leonard West here. And only Catherine has worked at the library for 20 years. I'm not crazy. I'm not saying you're crazy. David returned the notebook. But moving, change of place, stress, it can play with memory. I'm a doctor. A neurosurgeon. I know how the brain works. Then you know it can deceive. David put a hand on Ethan's shoulder, a gesture unexpectedly warm. Give yourself time. The town has this effect on newcomers. Too much silence, too much emptiness. People start filling it. Ethan wanted to argue but couldn't. Because part of him, the part that was still rational, asked, what if they're right? What if it's me? What if I'm inventing people, like I invented forgiveness for what I did? That evening he spent in Margaret's store. She was preparing to close, counting receipts, writing something in a thick notebook. You keep records? Ethan asked. Always. All my life. Margaret smiled. Someone has to remember what happens here. Can I look? She hesitated, then handed over the notebook. Ethan flipped through pages, daily records of sales, weather, visitors. And suddenly saw, February 15th. Leonard West bought tobacco and coffee. His heart pounded. See? He existed. Margaret took the notebook and looked at the page. Her face paled. This is my handwriting. But I don't remember. They stared at each other, and in the air between them hung a question both were afraid to answer. Margaret closed the store, and the three of them, she, Ethan, and David, whom they'd called, sat at a table in the back room. Margaret's notebooks were spread before them like evidence of a crime against reality. Look, Margaret's trembling finger pointed at entries. It says Allison Gray here. She bought milk every Monday. And here, Leonard West, tobacco every Wednesday. She turned the page. But if I read further, they're just gone. Names disappear. Entries rewrite themselves. Like someone goes back in time and erases them. David was silent, but his hands clenched into fists. My father, he finally said. He disappeared 10 years ago. I'm the only one who remembers. Everyone says I grew up here alone, that old Johnson was sheriff. But I remember my father. His voice. How he taught me to shoot. Why didn't you say? Ethan looked at him. Because I was afraid I was crazy. And now, David stood up, began pacing the room. And now there are two others who see the same thing. The siren sounded earlier that night, at 3:15. They all heard it, sitting in the store. The sound was deafening, as if the ambulance stood right outside the door. Red light flickered in the windows, reflected in glass displays, danced on walls. Ethan ran to the door and opened it. There was nothing on the street. Just snow and emptiness. But the light continued to flicker, not outside, but in the air, as if seeping through the very fabric of reality. And then he saw it. The ambulance was there. Semi-transparent, shimmering like a hologram. An old vehicle, from the 50s, with large round headlights and a white body yellowed with time. On the side, writing, Miller's Cross Emergency, 1952. The doors opened, and something emerged. Not human. Shape, yes, a silhouette, but no face, no details. Just a dark figure in a white coat, moving toward one of the houses. Do you see this? Ethan whispered. Yes, Margaret replied, her voice trembling. The figure entered James Porter's house, a solitary elderly man who lived on the edge of town. The light in his window flared brighter for a moment, then went out. The figure emerged, dragging something, another silhouette, less distinct, almost dissolved. They loaded it into the ambulance. Doors closed. The siren faded. The vehicle vanished, as if it had never been. Ethan ran to Porter's house. The door was open. Inside, empty. Not just empty, clean. No dust, no furniture, no traces of life. Walls bare. Floor washed. As if no one had lived there for years. He came out, breathless. David stood by the patrol car, checking something on the computer. James Porter, he said quietly. No records. House listed as abandoned since 2019. But he lived there. I saw him yesterday at the post office. I remember too, Margaret stood behind, hugging herself. He came to the store. Always bought canned goods and tea. She pulled out her notebook, open to the last page. Before their eyes, the ink began to fade, words blurred, disappeared. No, 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 no. David took the notebook from her. This isn't natural. This is something that has rules, Ethan interrupted. His doctor's brain kicked in, analyzing, searching for patterns. The siren appears every night. Takes one person. Time, 3:33, or close to it. Vehicle from 1952. And people don't just disappear, they're erased from history. But why do we remember? David asked. Ethan didn't know the answer. But he knew they needed to find it before the siren came for them. They found the archives in the basement of the old town hall, a place that seemed abandoned, but whose doors weren't locked. Margaret knew about this basement, though she didn't remember why. David carried a lantern, its light barely penetrating decades of dust. The folders were old, some crumbling at touch. But one file caught Ethan's attention, Miller's Cross Medical Records, 1952. Confidential. He opened it with trembling hands. Inside were records of an epidemic. Not an ordinary disease, something else. Progressive derealization, Ethan read aloud. Patients complain of losing connection with reality. Don't recognize loved ones. Claim the world around them is disappearing. His voice faded. Dr. Elijah Cross, chief physician, recorded, "We are not sick. We are dead, but cannot accept it." What does that mean? Margaret stared at him wide-eyed. Ethan turned the page. There was a list, 73 names. All residents of the 1952 town. And next to each, evacuated by emergency services. They all disappeared, David whispered. In one winter. Just like now. Ethan read on. The last entry was from Dr. Cross himself, dated March 15, 1952, I understand now. The town is not a place. It's a trap for souls that cannot let go. We all died that winter in the blizzard. Froze. But we kept living, refusing to acknowledge death. The ambulance is not transportation. It's release. It takes those who are finally ready to go. I'm the last. I'm the only one who remembers all the others. And when I go, the town will start again. With new souls. With new dead who think they're alive. Silence filled the basement. Margaret cried quietly, soundlessly. David stared into emptiness. And Ethan felt cold crawling up his spine, not physical cold, but realization. "We're dead," he said. Not as a question. As fact. When? Margaret wiped tears. Ethan closed his eyes, searching for the last real memory. Road. Snow. He was driving to town. The car skidded. He lost control. Tree. Impact. And then, night in the new house. As if nothing had happened. "I crashed," he said quietly. "On the way here. I remember now. The impact was final." David spoke, his voice cracking. "I fell through ice. 10 years ago. Looking for my father by the lake. Ice broke. I didn't get out." Margaret hugged herself. "My husband. When he died of cancer, I took all his pills. Didn't want to live without him. Woke up here. Thought I'd been given a second chance." They looked at each other, 3 dead souls who hadn't yet accepted their fate. And somewhere above, on the streets of Miller's Cross, 3:33 was approaching. They returned to Margaret's store and waited together. The clock on the wall had stopped at 3:33, long ago, perhaps years. Ethan held his notebook, looking at records of people no one else remembered. "If we remember the disappeared," he said, "then we're not ready yet. We're holding on." "To what?" Margaret asked. "To guilt." Ethan smiled sadly. "I thought I deserved punishment. That I had no right to live after what I did. But really I was just afraid to disappear. Afraid my life wouldn't matter." David nodded. "I was searching for my father. Thought if I found answers, I could let go. But father left long ago. I just didn't want to be alone. And I didn't want to forget." Margaret touched the notebooks. "Thought if I wrote everything down, people wouldn't disappear. But memory isn't life." The siren began exactly at 3:33. This time it didn't sound frightening, almost soothing. Red light filled the room, warm, almost tender. The ambulance materialized on the street, doors opened. The figure in the white coat entered. But now Ethan saw the face, old, tired, kind. Dr. Elijah Cross. He extended his hand. "Time to go," he said softly. Ethan looked at Margaret and David. They held each other's hands. He took their hands too. Together. Together. They walked into the red light, and the town behind them began to fade. Houses became transparent. Snow dissolved. But Ethan didn't look back. He looked forward, where figures of previous disappeared waited in the light, all those he remembered, whom no one else remembered. And finally, for the first time in months, his hands stopped trembling. The ambulance vanished. Miller's Cross became empty again, waiting for the next souls who cannot accept the end. But somewhere, in the unknown, Ethan Rios was finally free. The end.